We ready?
You all set, Laura?
Are you set, Laura?
Almost. You can start.
Almost? Okay. We all set? You got everything? Are you set? We're good? Okay. So I'm going to call the Select Board meeting of Tuesday, August 14th to order. And the first item is approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. I will note that our agenda item number 9 is removed to be addressed at our August 28th meeting. Are there any other changes? Okay. Here none. All in favor of the agenda with the slight modification signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, next is approval of the minutes of our July 31st Select Board meeting.
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. Are there any amendments, changes to the meeting minutes?
No, very complete.
Okay. Hearing none, all in favor of the minutes as drafted signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Okay, next is citizen comments, and this is an opportunity for anything that is not on the warrant agenda. Lloyd.
Do you want to use the microphone? I can just talk. My voice is loud. Oh, it's
Well, the
already.
microphone so that those that are out in the listening audience can hear you if you could, Lloyd.
In the antechamber back there or something?
Well, it's broadcast on
Oh,
TV.
that's great. Hello, Select Board. So I had a nice conversation with Jim about my anxieties. Not that he's a shrink, but I just wanted to mention that because our festival, 4th annual Middlebury Filmmakers, opens next Thursday, I have been paying close attention to the degree of work for the railroad project in the area. And I expressed some concerns to Jim before, and he, I thought, had some very good explanations about how things would be, where they might be deployed. I shouldn't get too worried about it. But last week I did happen to notice that right on Merchants Row, we'll have a lot of people walking back and forth on Thursday and Friday between Town Hall Theater and the Marquee Theater, that there were large dump trucks idling, throwing out a lot of exhaust, and also that there is a considerable amount of work going on in the Triangle area, in the Fountain area. And so I am just curious whether that will be sort of the extent that will take place then next Thursday and Friday, whether that kind of activity will take place. And if it does, whether there be any possibility of it ending a little early those 2 days, Thursday and Friday, because we are bringing a lot of people to town. And I'm just hoping that this sort of oral assault will be maybe a little less, or that most of the work would be elsewhere in town, maybe on the far side of the pit along the railroad tracks out there. So I guess my concern is idling vehicles on Merchants Road during the daytime hours when people are walking back and forth, and also just the overall level of noise coming out of the Triangle area during those 2 days. So I wanted to raise that as a concern that I do have, because when we bring so many people to town, I'm going to guess that over the 4 days we'll probably have about 3,500 people going to the movies. It's a lot. That's not individual people. A lot of people see more than one film, but it's a lot of bodies going into the movie theaters, on the streets, congregating, talking, and all of that. So I just want to make sure that on those 2 days, the work days, Thursday and Friday, that if there's any way we can minimize the amount of noise in that area, I would be grateful. And I think a lot of people, especially our out-of-towners who are not accustomed to what's happening, would not be confronted with a lot of stuff going on just in that specific area. So that is my what I wanted to raise with you all today.
Lloyd, when you say on Thursday and Friday, ending a little bit early, define a little bit.
Well, I'll tell you what our screening schedule is. So we will screen on Thursday at 10:30 and 1:30 at Town Hall Theater and the Marquee. So people will be out in between that. I'm not asking for a noon kind of thing, but I think when they get out of the 1:30 screening, which is usually around 3 or 3:30, that would be great if at that point things have subsided, because there will be a lot of people mingling in town. Friday, same thing, we screen at 10:30 and 1:30 all over, but the two most affected places are going to be Town Hall Theater and Middlebury Marquee, where there is the movement on those streets. Otherwise, we are up at the college, we're going to be at Twilight Hall and at Dana. But those two locations are affected by pedestrian movements in large numbers. So the same thing applies on Friday. There's a 10:30 screening and a 1:30 screening, and that usually will get out about 3:30, quarter to 4. We have a happy hour that's going on at the garden next to the Sheldon Museum that may not be too much affected by the noise, but there will be a lot of movement, certainly on Main Street, between Merchants Row and the town office building after the 3:30 films get out. So that's just a concern that I have about the level of noise. So if I was, my wish list would be maybe around 3:30, particularly on Friday, that if there is a lot of work going on in the Fountain area or along Merchants Row, that maybe that would stop a little earlier than usual.
Okay.
Okay. Just, I'm bringing it up.
Okay.
Okay. Do you want to address it now, Jim, or have you already talked with them?
Yeah, just to put it to rest. So Lloyd mentioned this to me a couple weeks ago, and I've talked with Kubricki, and we're going to throttle back the work in Triangle Park, particularly on Friday. We're on a tight schedule to make production goals day in and day out as winter approaches, but understanding Lloyd's concerns. And so I've talked to Kubricki, and we'll throttle back the noise in Triangle Park, particularly as the day advances on Friday. There are plans to excavate and blast in Triangle Park. Those have been pulled back out of Friday. And so I'll work with Lloyd and with the team on the ground here to make sure that the Filmmakers Festival can go forward, and the folks who are coming to it can enjoy themselves. Heather?
Can we put some kind of postcard, flyer, something in the information that moviegoers will get, just saying, this is a big deal for us, please, be patient and excuse our dust, and maybe explaining the project a little bit? Is there any funds for doing something like that? Just so people know what we're trying to do.
I don't think it would require any funds. We could just I could write something up and we could put it in the registration packet.
Yeah, everybody who gets festival passes, they have like a little manila envelope with a clasp on it. We could certainly just put something in there with their festival passes. It includes a lot of people in town and almost all of our out-of-town guests too. But whatever Jim wants to put in there is great, just so people have context. And also, thank you, this is the first I've heard, thank you for throttling. That'd be great, really helpful on that Friday.
Yeah, sure, Lloyd. We'll work together as the festival approaches to make sure we're good on that.
It's approaching. I'm saying, okay. But yes, if you guys can prep something, we're getting those packets made up now. We'll just dump them all in there. I'll get something. Okay.
Jim, maybe in what you write, point them to the nice storyboards for
Yeah.
more information.
Sure, absolutely. A lot of tourists have been in town reading those storyboards and scratching their heads. So, yeah, we'll do. Thank you.
Okay.
It seemed to me just an apology that we have public works going on, and with the inconvenience, I think that's...
A lot of our visitors have been very intrigued by what's going on.
Oh, I think they may be quite interested in going and looking at it, that's true. Yeah. I would,
Dan, did you have something else?
Yes, I did. I'd just like to take a minute tonight. As you know, we've gone through a process in the last year to hire a new executive director at the Town Hall Theater. So I'm here tonight to represent the Town Hall Theater and introduce you to Mark Bradley, the new executive director for the Town Hall Theater. We know it's impossible to replace Doug, but we've hired another executive director. We're keeping Doug, and Doug's going to be the artistic director, but for the day-to-day operations and the face of the Town Hall Theater, it's Mark Bradley. He's wanted to sit in tonight to particularly hear the presentation on the Merchants Row, and so, Mark.
You want to introduce yourself, Mark?
Sure, yeah. I think it's really funny you were talking about the placards there. This was the first thing I went to town. I was like, oh good, there's an explanation for what's going on over here. When we get to the part about what's going on with the one-way, is there going to be room for comments there? Okay,
yes.
I'll put it this way. When I came to Middlebury and climbed to the top of Chipman Hill. At that point, I think I probably bowed down and said, please, I hope I get a job offer from Town Hall Theater. Just looking out over this place is beautiful, so I'm glad to be here. Probably will be a number of select board meetings, so I'm sure I'll get to know everyone. Thanks.
Welcome to the community, Mark.
And by the way, I forgot to mention, Mark is come from Lebanon, New Hampshire. He was the assistant executive director of the Lebanon Theater there for the last 3 years.
Yeah, we have our own issues with rails and tunnels over there, so come have a beer with me and we'll go over that.
Only one?
Is there anything else? Okay. Next item on the agenda is an update on the appointments to the Economic Health Committee. Mary and Stacy came and visited with me following our last meeting. They understood the concern voiced during the deliberation of having related parties that are having multiple votes on any one committee. In doing so, their intent had always been to give to the community, and they don't want to detract from any process that we have going on, and so they flipped coins, and Stacy volunteered to step off from the committee to ensure that there was no appearance of overweighting any one opinion. Though it was very clear they have differing opinions and are, independent thinkers. Stacy then asked to have an opportunity to serve the community in on another committee or in another opportunity that comes up. So I submit Stacy's resignation to the board for acceptance and make a recommendation that we that we follow what we have done in the past procedurally, where if someone steps off from a board, the first alternate would then be elevated to full board membership and accept the board in that form. So I'll answer any questions, and certainly if you have any questions of the committee chair.
I would move we accept Stacy's resignation with gratitude for her service and understanding.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Are there any questions, comments? No. Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? And
I'll
opinion,
make a motion to appoint John Frieden as a full member of the Economic Health Committee.
I'll second that.
comments, questions? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay.
So now it's presumed Mike Capel will be the first alternate. Actually, the only alternate.
So the other thing, the committee is going to probably come back to us with, if you read their meeting minutes from their first meeting, and they're going to come back to us looking maybe with some clarification or suggestions on the charge of the committee, as well as the timeline, proposed timeline, and maybe a little bit more extended timeline for them to have proper deliberation and process, as well as I think there was some mention of a possible budget. Some things in the minutes came up that I thought probably is part of the onboarding process, and I suggested in talking with Kathleen that maybe that we would attend their next meeting scheduled for the 30th. It's the 30th, right? 30th, and so that we could answer any questions that the committee has. And I recommended that I go for the select board along with Heather, because Heather has not only the experience of the economic committee that we had done last year, but also the experience of leading the infrastructure committee. And some of the questions were about infrastructure priorities and where we stood, and so I thought maybe it would be beneficial to the committee to have an opportunity in their onboarding process to talk to us, and then we could bow out of the meeting and let them continue. If that's of value to you, I think that we've got that on our calendar, and we would be willing to do that.
Great.
So,
My best.
what's that?
I said I'll do my best.
Right, if not, I'll definitely, Heather will pass me her thoughts and stuff, so. Aaron, we have a presentation on a Merchants Row one-way preliminary design. And I think there's a lot of interested parties here.
There's not too much of a presentation.
You want to start with the one-way?
Let's go to the two-way first. So, prior to the project, Merchants Row two-way, very similar to what is seen here on the screen. And I think at the beginning of the project, we had anticipated that Merchants Row would go back to a two-way street. As you know, right now, the temporary bridge is in place. Merchants Row is one way going up the hill to the east. We've been chatting a little bit as a team and coordinated with Jim and others on, potentially turning Merchants Row into a one-way permanent roadway up the hill to the east. And we've been asked to put together a quick what-if scenario for what a one-way street would look like. So before we leave this, I think there's 40 parking spaces that are shown here on Merchants Row. Parking is always a big discussion point. And a couple of the things to point out. We do have space around the crosswalks, and here is just shown as the gourd area, line striping. We also are pretty much held to the width that we've got. Obviously, the Battelle block on the south side is a barrier, and there's an existing sidewalk and curb there. To the north is the park area, and we can't go further into the park. We can't have permanent impacts further into the park. Our NEPA process is already completed and has identified temporary impacts in the park and doesn't allow for permanent impacts further into the park. And so I guess with that, we'll flip to the one-way. So this is kind of what we came up with as a quick look at a one-way street and parking diagonal on both sides. Rather than the gourd striped areas around the crosswalks, we're showing grassed bump outs. They can easily go back to being gourd areas, but just a little bit different variation. This, I believe, is 47 parking spaces, and it's pretty tight. You see the western side of Merchants Row is just about as narrow as you would want to go with one way and the angled parking. This shows the sidewalks the same widths. I know there has been some discussion recently about, potentially having wider sidewalks on the southern side of Merchants Row and being able to create space for outdoor seating in the summertime for cafes, restaurants, and other event space. What else is there to point out here? I guess in this option, we took a hard look at the Battelle block driveway entrance and exit. Cars, trucks, deliveries would have to obviously come in headed eastbound and would have to leave headed eastbound as well. So being able to come out and make that turn to go up the hill, whereas today, pretty much in and out to the west. So I guess with that,
Is that turn doable, coming into the Battelle block for the fire truck, the ladder truck?
yeah, I believe it is. It's it's more favorable coming from that western side to come in there, get a bigger turn. Obviously, when you're coming out, you've got the vehicles on both sides to kind of thread the needle going through there. But yeah, the fire truck, the single unit trucks that typically make deliveries, cars and trucks obviously.
What would it take to widen, I mean, I think the idea of widening the sidewalk really makes a lot of sense in terms of encouraging, traffic on it, I mean, foot traffic and possibly cafes and so on, and it would become, I think, a much more desirable spot. If someone interested in opening a restaurant or, what would it take to do that?
Sure, yeah. I think your points are all well received, and in other communities where wider sidewalks, they've realized a lot of those benefits that you point out. In order to do that here, for a one-way street, we're probably looking at going back to parallel parking on the north side by the Village Green area. And we could probably gain about 10 feet doing so. As we go further to the east, at some point we could transition back to the diagonal parking where there's enough space to do so.
That would be loss of parking space.
Yeah, so 1, 2, 3, 4,
How many or how many?
I think there's 9 spaces there adjacent to what's the existing Triangle Park area. And I think you get 4 there otherwise, so you're losing 5 spaces there.
But this one has 7 more
7 more,
than
yeah.
how it was currently.
Yep.
So we're still.
You do gain a couple of additional on the south side of the triangle because it becomes one way. Now, if it were two-way, you could probably also get wider sidewalks, but you'd lose parking altogether on that side, on that north side. And you'd still gain, you'd gain about, the 9 or 10 feet that you would need to.
Aaron, how is the project, something like widening the sidewalk and funding, my understanding is that the project puts back what was there. So if we choose something like that, is that on the town's dollar?
I think this is a small enough change. We're replacing the sidewalks anyway, so if it's a little bit wider, it's a little more concrete, a little less pavement.
Okay.
All right.
One comment on the significance of that little piece of green on the north side, on the uphill side. It's really advised anywhere to have a green space between a sidewalk and a road. So
Yeah, that probably wouldn't be there like that.
that should say.
I think it was just filled in for this drawing, but that would be right up against this.
The water runoff, yeah.
You did get the comments from the infrastructure committee's meeting already, right?
In support.
In support, but we had some additional comments about snow removal and the heading up the hill to the right by Town Hall Theater, those 3 parallel parking spaces there, concerns about wintertime parking along there. I can't remember right at the moment all the... Are the green spaces raised?
As shown here, yeah, they'd be raised, but like I said, those could go easily back to being striped. I know that's easier for snow removal standpoint.
Do you know if those temporary bump outs that we had pictures of could grow grass? Or are those just like...
They didn't look like they did. It just looked like a platform, a removable platform. They had some flowers, like potted flowers on them. But look cute.
Are there other bump out options, like ones that could be plowed over and yet still create more than the striping where we have to restripe every year or two?
Potentially, I think there might be some stuff out there. I can look into that, or folks look into that.
We had a picture at infrastructure of some bump outs that are removable So they go out in the spring and then they get taken down in the winter for snow removal.
We'd still have to stripe under them though.
Yeah. But when there's the majority of the foot traffic in the summer, they would,
Oh, yeah. So that way you can
So there are other options if we decided we wanted to go one way that we could look at.
I was just going to say, as the town hall theater, as being a resident of that area, anything we can do to make more space for pedestrian traffic and encouraging businesses to have a more outdoor atmosphere along there with the ability that some of the restaurants that are there to have maybe outdoor seating and things like that, I'd highly encourage. And just making it more of a pedestrian friendly, comfortable, good place for people to be, so I think Mark agrees with that too.
Yeah, and Doug does as well. I think we're all pretty certain that widening the sidewalk, at least in front of the Patel block, will be great, especially if it's just it's only a few parking spots. I mean, even for us, we're very concerned about parking, but I think that's a reasonable trade-off. Personally, as somebody who walks around all the time, I probably would not want to see these bump outs in grass. Just as a pedestrian, I find that it's a little disruptive and it limits the number of stuff you can actually use the space for. I don't think anybody's going to go picnic out on a grass bump out next to a bunch of traffic. I don't know. I mean, maybe people would, but I hadn't heard about the removable bump outs. That's pretty neat and probably helps with snow removal. Do we have those like sidewalk plows here in Middlebury? We do. Okay.
Is there anyone here who's a proponent of beyond the Battelle block? Because I don't think we've talked about that, and I'm not sure have you looked at like up towards extending the width of the sidewalk up towards the Town Hall Theater, and what does that do as far as?
Yeah, we haven't looked too hard at that piece of it. Clearly there's more space in between the parking stalls up there. And so, especially as you get up towards Town Hall Theater, it looks like we could potentially bump that out a bit further. It would, you might lose a parking space or two to be able to still make it up the south leg of that triangle.
Are there any new benefits to having the parallel parking at the bottom by Battelle block? I'm thinking of, drop-off vans for events, could be from, the Lodge or Eastview, or it could be other tourists that are dropped off, or delivery vehicles, so is there any advantage to having parallel parking there for delivery purposes and drop-off purposes?
Potentially. I think I saw a comment the other day as well that asked about potentially just removing that crosswalk, mid-block crosswalk. And if you did that, you could potentially create a few more parking spaces.
I'm not sure I would do that because it is a very used bypass, and you see people even now when it's not marked doing it all the time.
Guilty.
I think you'll get the folks in the street are just going to cross. They're getting out of their car and they're just going to cross, right? And now if the one-way street, it's a lot narrower. So potentially.
Oh, okay. So you're saying because it's narrow.
It's narrow. It's only one way.
That you could get away with not having the crosswalk.
You'd maintain the crosswalk down at the intersection.
Right.
For sure.
If you want, right.
Is there a significance to why we're going up the hill one way rather than down the hill? It seems like, as an out-of-stater, our traffic pattern is difficult enough. If we were to go the other way, we could funnel people into town rather than filter them out.
I think part of it was the safety concerns that were raised by the vehicles at the intersection.
That's a deadly corner, I'd like to say.
The infrastructure committee.
I was present at the
That's the
site
biggest
when
reason.
someone was
Safety.
Our police department actually said that the 3 most dangerous crosswalks were those 3 when traffic was going the other way, so that would be the primary driving force. Sue?
I have a business right on Merchants Row, and the thing I see with this one-way traffic is people are lost. They don't know how to get around. They come into town, they go up Merchants Row, it's one way, and they keep going because they don't know how to get back, and then they just end up driving out of town. I have people stopping in my office all the time. How do I get, where do I go? What do I do? There's not enough direction. And I feel that is one big reason why a lot of businesses have gone out as well. Out-of-towners are driving up Merchants Row, they have no idea how to get back, so they just drive out of town. They just keep going.
That's my concern, being business owner on Merchants Row now, that we're just losing the tourists. We're just, all the businesses are, you see Clay's is gone, Carol's no longer, the diner. We're losing everything that's creating, our economy, helping, employ all our neighbors.
And you don't think it would be offset by having more cafe seating, which would improve that?
I think that's a great idea, but I think we're just creating an economic disaster for everything in town by having this one way. I mean, yes, okay, they'd filter probably to my other location, but that doesn't help anyone downtown.
And what about the increased parking?
The increased parking, I think it's minimal. I mean, I think confusion of tourists is just gonna make them leave anyway. Like I said, the other way made more sense to me because all you have to do is right turns rather than go up trying to turn around the Middlebury Inn, and that's so, they're so lost.
No idea how to get
Half the time I'm like, oh, can't go down that road. But I think Sue makes a valid point. And I think as a business owners, I think it's a disaster.
I've watched it for the last year. It's just gotten worse and worse. And it's sad. To me, it's very sad to see this. And I don't foresee it getting any better. Obviously, the railroad projects, it's got to move on. We've got 2 more years of it anyway, maybe 3. By then, how many more empty storefronts do we need?
Mark was next.
So as a recent tourist to Middlebury, I feel like once people are here, they're not going to just go because they're lost. I feel like if people are coming to Middlebury, they'll find some place to stop. My biggest concern with having it go two-way, my first time in town when I was walking along Pleasant Street up here, that intersection up there before you get to the courthouse is a little alarming to navigate. There's traffic coming from all directions and adding yet another place for cars to be coming through. I mean, all of the businesses around here, except for probably, I mean, not all of them, but a lot of us rely on foot traffic going by for publicity purposes. So I feel like any solution should not only be for the drivers that are coming through, but also for people that are strolling around. And I feel like for the tourists that do get out of their cars, the ones that are walking around, we should be catering to them as well.
What's the timeline on when the decision for this road has to be made?
That's a good segue. We're in final design for the project right now, and ideally this decision would have been made already. We would really like to have a decision as soon as possible so that we can get into the final plans and have it be part of that plan set moving forward.
My comment on the expansion of the sidewalk and cafe seating, regardless of whether it's two-way or one-way, is that currently we have 2 eating establishments, one on its way. And I don't think that the capacity for those 2 establishments to serve more people on the sidewalk is worth the elimination of parking spaces for the downtown, which is better for everybody. I don't necessarily think it's fair to make a decision like this for 2 current restaurants that are there. I walk up and down that sidewalk all the time. I see people outside of Carol's. a couple times, even when they have tables out there, they're not filled that frequently in the summertime. Sabai Sabai is a big enough restaurant, and, it's not Church Street as much as we'd love for Middlebury to be more robust like Church Street. I just don't think we have the capacity to fill cafe seating in that location at the expense of parking.
Jim, you had a couple of emails from folks there, that like from Doug and from...
Yeah, I think, well, I reached out to, some of the local business owners, and Doug Nettie was one of the ones who responded, the owner of the Patel block, and he was in favor of the one-way solution, and I think saw the value of expanding the sidewalks out too, thinking that would, create a more conducive atmosphere for the restaurants in the Patel block, current and future.
Irene?
Yeah, I just have to comment about the closing of the stores. A lot of that, don't blame the bridges. Clay's closed in Rutland. They don't have a bridge construction project going. It's online shopping that's killing our brick and mortar stores.
Lloyd, can you go back to the one-way traffic for a second? Does anybody feel that the distance on the western part of Merchants Row, that the parking spaces are projecting into the street so far that if people are backing out of those spaces, isn't it kind of likely that they could easily hit cars parked on the other side? That just seems so narrow to me.
That's about as narrow as you want to go.
But by saying as narrow as you want to go, meaning that the tolerance is pretty low right there, right? That ideally you'd want to have more spacing between your north and south parking slots there. No? They seem very tight.
They're fairly tight, but I mean, that's part of the angled spot is you don't back straight out, you back out, go forward.
I just sense the potential for major congestion there in terms of cars proceeding up, cars trying to back out from both sides. I think there would be, there are issues in that too, if that's how it looks pretty literal to me.
I think Lloyd brings up a valid point. I mean, I have large tractor trailers come in to do deliveries, and then there's other places in our building that do the same. And I think if my vehicle is parked there, it's just going to create more of a disaster. People trying to back out, pedestrians, trunk gets open. I don't think that parking or street plan is very effective for what we're trying to do. More safe.
So I'm mulling it, and I can see the pros and cons of both, and I'm thinking about safety, really, navigating this, and again, to our point about directing traffic. I mean, even if we did go to two-way, is there a way that we could manage the direction of traffic so that we have increased safety at Main Street and Merchants Row? I mean, maybe this parking configuration is better for delivery too, this two-way design, which is what we seem to be suggesting, which is the old configuration. And to Amy's point, maybe we're not getting that much benefit to increasing the sidewalk there. Although we thought, and a lot of people seem to comment that we had the potential for seeing improved vitality by doing that, having more cafe seating on that corner.
We live it every day though. We're there every day, so we see what's going on.
In a few months in the year that we'd be able to utilize that, I don't know if it would be.
Could you clarify why that's any safer for delivery? I would see that the two-way traffic is being more confusing. If the issue is the parallel versus diagonal parking, I think that there are other solutions. But is that what your concern is having a parallel parking area?
I think the diagram prior for the one-way, obviously didn't have enough room for vehicles to travel. I'd be up to see if did parallel parking, how that would change. But I think having tractor trailers going right or left would make more sense. I think the two-way makes more sense. whole game where actor buses were before. I think two-way makes more sense for Merchants Row.
I'm just as a citizen, that one way has been so much easier to navigate the town. You know, up on the right side, with traffic turning down those two streets, going both ways down those two streets, it is twice as much to look for when you're pulling out. This is significantly easier and safer, and just creates a great flow around the town. I've been excited just driving. It's just so easy. It makes no sense to go back to two ways. It's just going to be dangerous, and you're not going to be able to get through trucks on one side, two-way cars going the other way, and cars parked on the other side. That sounds like a nightmare to me. So, may keep it wide, but I think it should have wider sidewalks. But the merchants know more about that than I do. But just the flow through town is significant.
How much space in the travel lane do you gain by going parallel on the, go to one way, please? Like going parallel on that top section?
You probably gain roughly 9 or 10 feet.
9 to 10 feet? So then it would be a matter of discussion whether to extend the sidewalk some of that.
Wait a minute, what's your point, Brian? To do parallel parking over there?
I get the concern about having it so tight that then once you park a truck in there for unloading, that it's going to be the same way with a two-way that it was a disaster before. We never liked it. That's why everybody was happy, because the buses were parked in there and you couldn't see as you were coming through there. I think was the majority of the comments that Jim and I have received on some of the stuff, but you're going to create something very similar here if you have the diagonal parking on both sides and then there's a truck parallel parked behind them while he's unloading. You got blind spot because it's just not that wide.
So, a couple of things. I think that we could solve some of the truck issue if the suggestion of removing the middle crosswalk was part of the one-way design. And I think if we chose a two-way design, I would be a very strong advocate for removing the Merchants Row, that crosswalk there, because I think
Down here?
yes, if we were to choose to go, I think I would take that cross. Like if people want to cross that street, they should go up where traffic can see them better and cross there. And I think if we went with a one-way design, I would remove the middle one and figure out how to make some truck space in those hashed marks.
Well, I would be a little worried about that. If let's say you park there and you're going to show a town hall theater, people are going to cross there anyway. So if we're talking about widening the road and allowing cars to go faster and removing a crosswalk, I don't think those two things combined really make it safer. Because if you're looking to get to Town Hall Theater from there, the detour is actually quite substantial, because you'd have to go all the way up to Pleasant Street on one side and then cross two streets to get over to Town Hall Theater.
They're gonna get out of their cars and they're gonna cross the road wherever they want anyway, so.
Yeah. So I kind of feel like that should be encouraged. People should cross the street at a crosswalk.
The only thing I'm thinking is there's pros and cons to both situations, and it seems to me like we should maybe have a little subcommittee work on this separately, choose which one we want, and then work out. So there's got to be compromises in either choice we make to accommodate certain things. So that's why, if we need to go, if we go one way and we want to accommodate some truck unloading space for the merchants, then pedestrians are going to have to give up some, we've got to compromise a little bit here. Especially if we're going to consider widening the sidewalk.
the unloading of the trucks, comes at a certain period of the day, I think. And I'm just wondering, I hate, I mean, I realize it's important. We have businesses that need to get their merchandise, and the way in which it's delivered is by truck. And I'm a little concerned about making that sort of the lever that turns the whole thing. I've observed pedestrian traffic, and it seems to me the pedestrian traffic that I see most up and down the sidewalk when there's something going on at the Town Hall Theater, yes, and I hope that increases. But crossing the street, I think, and I'm looking at the crosswalks, those are the busiest crosswalks, the ones on Merchants Row and Main Street. And those are also the most dangerous ones when you have two-way traffic. It's not just the fact that the traffic is running in that direction, it's the fact that they turn. And especially when you're turning from Merchants Row and you're heading out of town toward the college, it's almost blind, and it's dangerous. That's all there is to it. So
We could say no
having it
left
one
turn.
way heading up the hill is a much safer solution as far as pedestrian traffic. And I think the whole emphasis of making Merchants Row more habitable is that it's habitable for pedestrians. This should be more of a pedestrian place, and automobiles should really be secondary. And I think we should be focusing on that. How accommodating is it for people on foot and safe?
I do agree with you, Victor, but at the same time, we want places for these pedestrians to go.
That's true.
And if we make it so difficult for the businesses in that area to operate, and that includes getting their inventory and merchandising in,
All right.
then there's going to be nowhere for the
All
pedestrians
right,
to visit.
we have to accommodate that. I realize that. But it seems to me the merchants are going to do much better if there are pedestrians who like to walk there.
Yeah.
And you want to make it a place where they'll go and like to be. I mean,
Which is why I think we need some kind of compromise, and I would suggest at this point, given the time constraints, that we have a little subcommittee and try to work out those details. I don't know what the answer is. I'm just trying to compromise.
Laura's comment that she just made, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. If the two-way option is the option that's chosen, limiting left-hand turns onto Main Street from Merchants Row, I think would be crucial. I've seen people be hit by cars, I've seen fender benders. You cannot get far enough into Main Street before taking that left-hand turn without watching the reflection of the glass of 44 Main Street to see if there's a car coming in the other direction. You just can't navigate that without being in the roadway. I think that's actually one of the most dangerous scenarios in all of this, is a left-hand turn on a Main Street from Merchants Row. So that I would advocate, if that's the choice, that be a right-hand turn lane only.
I came here actually, I've had my opinion on this, and there's really two issues. One is, do we make it one way or go back to the second? I mean, that's issue A. And then the second is just a refinement of what it looks like, whether we have bump outs or whether we have green or what have you. That's issue B. I've watched that intersection for too long and seen not only close calls, but fatal calls. And even the idea of a right turn only, you still have to pull out enough. And I can see the situation where somebody is looking down Main Street to see if anybody's coming, and somebody's in that crosswalk at the time they decide to move, and there we have the bad situation again. I've watched this one way, and just can't argue the fact that it's safer. I mean, I just don't see how there's a counter argument to that. And it seems to flow quite well, and people find places. I mean, are there confusion? Sure. But I travel a lot. I've been to towns with a lot worse than this, and people find their way. If there's a reason to be there, people, and I look at the next generation, they're more inclined to walk. You know, so to the idea of making this more of a walkable scenario, to me, is very appealing. I just don't see any reason. I've been trying to hear it and trying to grasp a reason to go back to two-way, and it just eludes me. In my mind, it's just not there. As far as delivery trucks, well, delivery trucks, they find a way, and they tend to come when it's convenient for them anyway. They do a lot of early mornings. When you look at the situation around with Two Brothers, those trucks make it work over there, and that's arguably a worse scenario than this is by far. I mean, they figure it out. As far as backing into each other, well, this is a lot better in places I've seen otherwise, and it's fine. And this is no worse than a grocery store parking lot. No. So, after thinking about this and listening and hearing, not just the people who are here, but others who have approached me, one way just makes all the sense in the world. And I can't see going back to two-way. As far as the rest of it, refinement of design, as far as any committee, I think maybe the committee could just give input and help into Aaron so they can proceed onward and refine the design down. But I'm an advocate at this point of saying, give them the endorsement, make it one way and go.
Well, Karen, I was wondering what you were going to say about what we've heard tonight.
Well, as you all are well aware, I think that parking is definitely on the forefront of every merchant and business owner in the downtown that relies on customers coming in. So that's certainly always one of the concerns. For me, I do really love the idea of an extension of that sidewalk, because I think that it's a little bit more about the future possibilities than it is what's currently there. Because I just in planning the block party for tomorrow, Merchants Row is sort of a dead area when it comes to planning events right now. We're gonna try our hardest to pull traffic up to Kiss the Cook, but it's really, we don't know if that's gonna work or not. And I think that if that sidewalk was extended, we have so many more options for the kinds of events that we can do that can kind of come around that corner and really sort of liven up that whole section of town, which right now really is, I think, struggling. And I think it goes hand in hand with whatever ends up in the Triangle Park area in terms of vibrancy and future events. So I just want to think about this not necessarily for the right now and what businesses happen to be there right now and what the current sort of economic or current retail climate is right now, and think about it a little bit for what is in the future and what are we trying to design for. And I think that Nick's point about pedestrian-friendly access is really important in terms of what we're trying to design for. So while I definitely want us to maintain as many parking spots as possible, I think that just building for that vitality is really crucial.
And you actually hit a good word. That's the word future. This is not a static event. This is dynamic. And this is dynamic for a long time. And the trend in towns is not more cars. It's pedestrian interaction. It's the community that's created. And the towns that are doing really well across the US and Canada are the ones that have done that. It's what we admire when we go to Europe, when we see the way it's the interaction. They didn't design towns for cars. They designed it for people to interact and be able to park relatively close, but still to have the core. And so the dynamic future is good. I mean, it will be good. Once we get through this couple of years, I see this area being just tremendously exciting, and I see great social interaction increasing there, and I don't want to get stuck in a single moment in time.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you brought that word up.
Yeah, I mean, I see this as planning for the future. I mean, we're going to, obviously this will be involved somewhat of a redoing of Merchants Row, and I think let's do it. And I think the one-way direction is appropriate and heading east, not west. But also, it seems to me, all of this discussion raises a very important issue. What we need is a place where people can come to town and park their cars and leave them and walk around town. And we don't have that yet. And I think it's something that we've talked about, but it really is essential. I mean, we want people to come to Middlebury and then become pedestrians, walk around it. And it's a beautiful town. They can walk down to the park by the waterfall and picnic and so on. There's so much in this area for foot traffic. But if you're driving, for example, if you want to go to the theater and then drive off to Flatbreads or something, you're not going to take a car. You know, I mean, the nice thing is to walk that route. And I think really, to save a few parking places and so on is not going to solve the parking problem that we have in town. We really have to address the major issue. We need a place where people can park their cars and then go around town. And we've been talking about doing it for a long time. I think it's an essential need.
I think we also, I think we've talked about the need for parking and the signage issues, and Middlebury, as far as signage goes, I think has done a fairly poor job of directing people where to go to find those parking spaces so that they can park and then be pedestrians in the downtown. And to Nick's point, we don't have a residential downtown. We don't have a lot of places where people are necessarily living. I mean, there's the Patel block that has a lot of residential spaces now, but a lot of those folks in there are transient. They're not here all the time anyway. So people are going to drive to Middlebury and then be pedestrians here. And as far as, the discussion about moving the sidewalk, my comment before was I don't think we should do it at the expense of parking spaces. They don't necessarily, I think, have to be there. If there's an opportunity to have, like Karen's talking about the future. I was just thinking about Carol's space and Sabai, but as we've seen over the last 10 years, those spaces have been different retail spaces. I think if we, to Victor's point, we've got to figure out how to make people realize either that we have parking here and they just don't know where it is, or build something where people can go and park their cars and walk around town. And there is, as a side note, the Neighbors Together group in Better Middle Park, we do have a committee working on signage, and we're going to present that at another time. But that if you drive around, we all know where we're going, we know how to get there, we know where the parking spots are. But if you drive around with sort of tourist blinders on, it's a disaster to try to find certain places.
Yeah.
So I think that to me is the key, is the signage. And regardless of what happens in the street, if people have direction, people navigate Boston. They ought to be able to get around Middlebury with a few signs here and there.
Yeah, I agree. We definitely need better signage. If we're going to make it one way, we have to have signs so people know where they're going.
Mark?
Well, I thought that might be a nice compromise, if the issue is really just people not being able to find their way around, if you point out where the parking actually is and do that in a better way, then maybe that part can be removed from the conversation. I just moved downtown and refuse to move anywhere else. I'm not transient, so I kind of wonder if there might be more of us hiding out there. Or maybe people would be less transient if it was a nicer place to walk around and make a life living downtown.
There's just not that much opportunity for residential living right downtown.
Yeah.
That's my point.
I just had one comment about each design. When it was two-way, I thought that leg of the triangle on the south side of the monument was really kind of crazy when you try to turn left from Pleasant Street, from South Pleasant Street into Merchants Row. It seemed like, that really was pretty dangerous. And I would not like to see that come back. On the one-way design, I kind of like the idea of
increasing the width of the sidewalk and making those spaces parallel next to the Patel block for drop-offs and deliveries. So that sounded like a good idea to me.
I mean, we haven't talked about the actor buses and whether we envision them continuing to drop off at the post office and Battelle Block, which could, maybe that's continuing to work, but would we want to gain any parking back in those spots? Well, only the post office, by having actor part of the configuration of drop off and pick up in one of these areas on Merchants Row. I know we've seen a configuration where we thought about a slip where the actor bus, but we're told that we can't really claim any of the green space, so we're limited in terms of that. But I too kind of like the drop-off designation. I know what you're saying, that trucks will find a way to drop off and so maximize the parking with as much diagonal parking as you can. I could go either way, I guess, on it.
I actually see a spot as you get it by the monument there, where it's wide, which just geometrically is kind of odd looking, but it's the way the shape of it is. But I could see them pulling right in there and making it work perfectly fine front loading.
You mean right here?
No,
The grade is too steep here.
well, they'll make it work.
Yeah.
For special,
I'm already doing that.
yeah, exactly, single straight axle, they'll do it. So, but either way, I mean,
Not for actor, if that's what you mean.
no, actor's a different scenario, and that becomes a whole other conversation is what happens there. I mean, but I think fundamentally, what VHB is in the position of now is having to proceed with a design with some, for us to decide whether we want two or one way, and then take the comments, and if there's a subgroup that's giving input into them, fine, but so that they can proceed on, because I know the situation they're in as an engineer, where you've got to make a decision, you're against a deadline, and it gets critical to get it right, and you're really struggling with it. So I think we can make the others work out.
Rick?
Just a comment, I'm in favor of keeping it one way, going east. I think if you go back to both ways, the only solution for the intersection of Main and Merchants Road is a light.
Right.
That's the only safe solution there. Just keep it as it is, as it currently is, one way going east.
So let me just try to move us forward a little bit here. I'm pretty well hearing a consensus, or at least a strong majority towards a one-way. There are some considerations that maybe we should be working out as far as the design. If we are able to give you kind of the 90% solution that the board is in favor of one-way, does that get you started and give us time to work out things like how we want the parking, the lines, and what those bump outs might look like, if we want to bump out or not, and where we would have actor stops within the downtown and those things? Would we have time to work those, or do you need a complete solution to do all of your?
It gets us started knowing one or the other. Really, we are trying to finalize our section through there, and so we do want to understand, where the crown of the road is going to be. That obviously affects every single section as we go up the road. Answers sooner than later would be preferred. Not that we can't make a last minute change, but.
When is the next infrastructure committee meeting?
The 30th.
It's right after our next select board meeting.
Yeah.
So motion to approve making of Merchants Row one-way east, and would that be?
I mean, we can start with something like this, and then.
Could you give us a couple other looks where we ended up getting some parallel parking in a little wider section where we could extend that sidewalk? See what it would look like if we extended it 6 feet versus, I think you had said 10. and so that it was a little wider travel lane. Just give us a couple things to look at, maybe at our next select board meeting, when maybe we could
We could get closer.
deliberate that and get closer to a final.
So hearing with Victor, you just made the motion for one way.
For one
We
way.
need a second.
With the understanding that Aaron
Well,
will
can I
come back
add to the motion?
with some alternatives at our next meeting
Okay.
to finalize
Parking.
that would be the motion, yes.
Just to state.
Yeah, I mean,
So we're accepting the principle of one way heading east, and then ask you to come at our next select board meeting with some alternatives to how the plan would finally work out. And you've heard the discussion of what the concerns are.
well, I would second that.
Okay, seconded, our discussion on the motion. So Victor's motion of moving that we adopt the principle that it's going to remain one way headed east, but that, and asking Aaron to bring us back some ideas on how to work that one way. Is that?
That's right.
what I heard? Comments on the motion? Questions on the motion? Okay, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Okay, so I think you heard a lot of the comments from the audience. There's certainly some really good points that were made tonight, and I think we need to let that soak in, absorb it, and kind of figure out how does that all look in action, and what brings the most value for us as we look at what's the long-term future for the downtown in that area. Okay, thank you, Aaron. What's that? Yeah, it's very good discussion.
Well, nice segue, Brian. Well done. I was gonna say the same thing, how timely, that maybe while we're trying to make decisions like that, we think, geez, like what's the overall plan, or, how do we think about some of the higher level issues? Like when Victor mentions parking, wouldn't it be nice to have a map that shows just some potential places where that parking could be?
Right.
Whether it's where it ultimately goes or not, at least we'd be thinking about it.
Yeah. That would be wonderful.
Yeah. So this will sound a little familiar to some of you because this was something we talked about in 2016. We did not get the funding that year. And then the next year, our town plan was in the middle of an update, so we weren't eligible. So this year, I'd like to reapply to that same program for a downtown master plan, if that makes sense to you guys. So I just want to kind of go through and kind of remind us what a downtown master plan is, or the context of it. This is the overall context. You've got your Middlebury comprehensive town plan, and then the downtown master plan would be a component of the comprehensive plan. And the downtown master plan would also have recommendations in it that could inform your capital plan. And then this is just a list of some other kinds of plans and studies that are also typically referenced or incorporated into a municipal town plan. So you're familiar with all these kinds of plans. You've heard these kind of filtering around. These are all things that we should do someday, but it'd be nice to start with the downtown master plan first. And some of those recommendations might inform those smaller plans. So my plan, I couldn't resist this graphic, because sometimes downtown feels like this. We've got a lot of different...
They plan that?
Ironically, this website was about how this actually works better than controlled intersections because people figure it out. So maybe we can all figure it out together. Downtown has a lot of stakeholders with a lot of different aspirations, and sometimes we're butting heads. So an overall downtown master plan might help us be on the same page as much as possible. And so the purpose of the plan would be you'd summarize where you are now, and you'd try to articulate a vision of where you are going, then you'd get some directions for getting there. I think of it like a roadmap type of thing. There are benefits to doing downtown master planning. So, every year the infrastructure committee and everybody else in town kind of gets together and applies for these implementation grants in downtown, and they've sent us a little feedback from the state saying, we'd really like you to have a downtown master plan that's showing us where you're getting some of these ideas from for implementation.
And so you can have increased confidence in future investments as a town because you know that your projects probably have a little bit of public support. You've done a little bit of public process light before we get to things, like we just had, like with a little hearing. Increases your efficiency in decision-making. You're reducing the conflicts and duplication of efforts, and you're ready for your funding opportunities in advance because you're getting your timing right. If we start with this, then in 3 years we'll be ready for that. So the downtown master plan, again, gives you an overall roadmap. So what is in a downtown master plan? It's worth just kind of going over this again. Now, every downtown master plan is a little bit different, but they all kind of have the same basic framework. You've got your background data or your existing conditions to begin with, and that's like your demographic and income data. This is all stuff from our comprehensive plan, but it would kind of get into this a little bit more. And this is something I'm working on now, trying to collect some background data, and I want to get Karen's help and Nancy, and we're all kind of a mind of trying to figure out like what's our inventory of parking, and what are the characteristics of these visitors coming to downtown, what are they looking for, and what's some of the retail data. That'd be fascinating to know. So that's your background data that you can kind of collect in advance. The next thing is your public process, and everybody thinks of this when they think of the downtown master planning process. That's where you try to set your vision and, oh, there's Victor, yay. That's where you have your vision and where you try to like kind of develop your values as a community. And so these are some facilitated discussions. We can talk more in future slides about what that public process looks like, but we want to have a meaningful public process that has all of these components. And we want to kind of implement it doing these things here. So it's everything from small meetings like that to being at the farmer's market. There's all sorts of fun ways to do the public process piece to establish our vision as a town. Because I feel like when we think about downtown, we don't necessarily know, we can't exactly like state 5 different things that make up our downtown and where we want to go. And a lot of downtowns across the state are very different. So let's think about a vision and our basic values as a town. The next thing in the content is all these plans seem to have a big map at the back, just an overall illustrative master plan. We call it illustrative because it doesn't mean that everything on that plan is necessarily going to happen. But this is where you start to show your infill development opportunities, like potential parking areas like we were talking about, areas that you could renovate. So that's your overall master plan map. And then the next slide shows how you can actually kind of, oops, that's not the next slide. Downtown transportation, that's fine, Kathleen. So the downtown transportation plan is good. They all look a little bit different. This is the one from the Burlington plan. It's a connectivity map that would just be really neat to show the bike connectivity, the pedestrian connectivity, our major roads, things like that. But that could also look like a downtown transportation and circulation plan as well. Maybe that's what we were talking about tonight. Are there more efficient ways to move traffic around in downtown? But there's usually some plan that talks about a transportation component. And then the next one is where you take your illustrative master plan for the overall area and you break it down and have a targeted area plan or two. And so that might look like the civic space surrounding the library and town hall and the EVI area, or that might look like the Greg's Market area in Seymour Street. And you just try to imagine one of those areas or two of those areas a little bit more specifically, and just get something on paper so that as you're planning ahead and thinking about grant opportunities, you just got something that demonstrates to people that you're thinking ahead. And then the plan usually has subject area discussions, and each community is gonna reveal different subject areas depending on how the public input process goes. And if I had to predict, I would think that these are probably some subject areas that Middlebury would be interested in. And those are all the things that we hear about over and over. Oh gee, we should do a river walk, or oh geez, we need more housing in downtown. Like, this is an opportunity to get the consultant to work with us to draw out what they can learn from us about those areas, and then give us some recommendations and a little bit of advice about how to pursue those things in the future. And so a critical component of it too is the implementation plan, or the recommendations. They're usually toward the back, and those recommendations are sometimes high-level recommendations, like we need new policies, or we need a new group to look into such and such, or just what are the critical items and how do you tackle those? There can also be specific projects in here that would help inform capital planning, not to direct capital planning, because theoretically everyone involved in capital planning would also participate in the downtown master plan. We're just trying to kind of get on the same page in terms of what are our priorities. And this is what you're showing the state when you're applying for grant funding, to demonstrate to them that you've planned ahead and tried to think about what your priorities and what your projects would look like. And so just in general, I wanted to show you a schedule because I hear a lot of people talking about a downtown master plan and they want to do it like tomorrow. And I wanted to show you sort of a perfect schedule in my mind, which would be doing phase 1 now, just collecting baseline data between now and May of next year if we were to get funding in January. So our Better Connections grant deadline is January of 2019. Awards are made in March. You have to get it done in a year and a half. You would do your RFP in April. Realistically, you could get started in May. You should take your summer and some of the autumn and then maybe wrap up at the end of the year. So if you had a final deliverable or a plan in January 2020, you'd have some really neat recommendations that people were pretty jazzed up about. So in 2020, you could hit the ground running and start implementing some of those recommendations. It won't be everything all at once. This is in no way like a cure-all, or it's not going to figure everything out, but it would be just really nice to use some of the motivation and the energy that we have around downtown now, which is like a lot of chatter and a lot of frenetic energy, and just sort of direct it in productive directions. And then there's the cost piece. So what I picture is hiring a consultant, and I've got a few in mind that have done these in other places to facilitate those public sessions. Facilitated sessions are really good. It's nice to have a savvy consultant that can really kind of draw people out and just kind of shape the conversation. Total project cost to do all of this and do it right would be $50,000 to $60,000. And so that kind of brings us to what happens between now and when we apply for the grant. Like, there's a lot of people are talking to me like, oh, I want to do like a downtown master plan as soon as possible. I want to get busy on something. Jim sent out he's not here, but he sent out his survey question, and people are excited around that. And it kind of gives me pause because I'd like to see people get excited about the downtown master plan, but we can't get them excited now if we don't know if we're going to get the funding. That's just not fair to the community to kind of make them a promise that we're not necessarily keeping. So I could definitely work on phase 1 work and just collecting background information, or if you wanted to definitely do a downtown master plan and you could somehow, and again, this isn't my forte, magically find the money to guarantee the grant if we didn't get it, then we could start preparing the community a little bit earlier. Kind of go into the farmer's market and just, having a couple sessions where we're doing a little early visioning. And I wanted to include some of these ideas. In Burlington, they prepared a full year ahead of their downtown master plan. They had a speaker series, they did a lot of like word of mouth and, public media sort of blips. They had an art contest where they had all the kids like draw like what they thought downtown should be, and they selected a winner. Social media. So the sooner you can start probably to promote this, the better it's going to be. But again, I hesitate to start until we know we're going to get the funding. I guess that's all I really have to say about that.
Thanks, Jen. I think what this really leads to is really strengthening our town core. And I go back to my words earlier about how the towns that I'm seeing are doing really well right now for those with strong cores. And I see the strong desire, especially say among my kids' generation, to be in town centers, to have the social action of they live, they work, they socialize in an area where they can move around pretty easily and walk. So anything we can do to get these projects going, I'm an advocate of. I'm a fan of the EDI. I've said that more than once, and addressing the parking issues that we've talked about more than once, and the strong Merchants Row area. We want all of that to happen. So it seems to me that what this does is potentially it enhances the opportunity for capital investment to come in and reduces the risk, because capital investment is going to come in from those who obviously are willing to fund these projects and these new buildings, and the developers who are going to be taking them on, and of course the architects and the engineers and everybody else who's going to work with it. So they want to be sure that once they start moving down the road toward a project, it's going to happen with the minimum amount of obstruction. So I guess part of the question is, with Burlington's master plan, did that happen? Has it actually helped to enhance the rate at which rehabilitation, redevelopment, and enhancing the town core has happened?
Yeah, I think the downtown and waterfront, it was a downtown and waterfront joint master plan.
Okay.
I think it definitely helped inform that whole discussion of when they wanted to build the big skyscraper high-rise with the apartments. You know, they were definitely referring back to that plan. I know that it has spun off several other plans. Like, because of the downtown master plan, people have been able to prioritize and know that they want to get organized around planning their parks and the Moran plant and things like that. So sometimes this is like a logical first step to taking on some of those bigger pieces.
And you mentioned also guaranteeing grant, and this is something maybe for us to think about in another discussion at a later point, is, I mean, Jen's said we're looking at, what, 50 to 60 for this grant. We may, hopefully we do get it, but what if we don't? I mean, the idea of stalling this master plan advancement and ultimately the capital investment in the improvements to the town center, that, you know, delaying that longer just is not very desirable in my mind. So while I'm very reluctant and cautious about how we even would spend some of the local option tax funding, if we look at it from the perspective of using some of that money to strengthen the downtown, well, this could actually classify under the soft cost aspect. You know, when a building is designed, there's the hard cost of making the structure rise, and it's the soft cost of designing it. So, if this is a way to possibly break up this logjam and get this process moving, if we don't get the grant, it would be something I would be worth considering or entertaining, and that would be a point for us all to discuss at a later point as to whether this is something we'd want to do. But I'd like to get this thing moving yesterday. I'm probably one of those people that you have to hold back a bit, but...
It's hard to get behind something that's so ethereal, you know? Like, especially, I don't know, you know, like Governor Scott, for instance, is always like, you know, we need to like build things or do things, and we all want to build and do things, but I worry that we don't have the right foothold to begin to take certain things on because we haven't done this sort of like comprehensive planning step. You used to have a downtown plan. The last one was 2000. I saw Fred Dunnington today and confirmed this with him. The last one was 2000, and it was more of a capital improvement plan. And so, I mean, we're almost 20 years overdue to looking at downtown as a whole again. And a lot of other downtowns have these, and we don't.
I just wanted to say, I think that we're at such a critical point right now when it comes to the rail project and the challenges that our retailers are facing, and this idea that we have this opportunity to kind of go about the revitalization efforts the right way, and really putting that thought into it and taking the time that it needs to kind of everybody get on the same page. And I'm definitely one of the people that Jen has referenced in terms of, you know, slowing me down and saying, no, we need a master plan. And I was wondering too, Jen, if you wouldn't mind sharing our conversation about retail specifically,
right,
and how that's actually not a part of this necessarily, and that it's actually sort of maybe an offshoot of this smaller. And that was an area that I was confused about, because in my thinking I was sort of like, yeah, let's get a retail plan as part of the master plan, and I think Jen can speak to that a little bit more, but I just want to say, I just think that this is such a perfect opportunity for our community to go about these revitalization efforts that need to happen in the really best way possible, by really taking our time and doing it the right way. So BNP is very much in favor of a downtown master plan, and I just want to say thank you to Jen for your efforts in getting us to this point. I know it's been a couple years in the making, but thank you.
Yeah, it's overdue. So yeah, our conversation was that the downtown master plan is not the same as sort of a retail study. There are different subject areas that the master plan will cover, and different things will rise to the surface. And, you know, undoubtedly economic vitality in downtown will be one of those subject areas. And we'll want to like really get as much as we can out of our consultant and the other experts that are there to like try to get them to explain that to us. But it's not the same as having something like the Arnett Muldrow study, which actually studied retail in downtown and tried to tell us what retail needs to go back in downtown. So it won't be a guidebook for what to do in terms of economic development in downtown. Frank, you've probably seen these before. You could back me up on that. But what it probably would do is discuss in general terms, like, what is it about your downtown that could be a real economic driver? So then it would talk about the arts and culture piece that we know is here, and it would really draw it out and be like, what do we have? Like, what does it do for us? What more could we do to encourage it? And it just seems like a really mature way of thinking about downtown. I know the college is a huge proponent of this downtown master plan too, because they really want to understand like how our community sees them fitting in to our downtown as well. So.
Well, to the points that have been made, it sounds like, if we could get this going sooner rather than later, that would be good. I would support that. I don't know what that means in terms of funding from us. And, I know about the match that we have to budget for the grant. I don't know if the Economic Health Task Force looks at this and says, maybe that's a part of the funding with some of our economic development dollars. I don't know, but anyway, I'm thinking about that too. Like, I definitely support getting a master plan for downtown going.
Is it an all or nothing grant?
Can you rephrase that?
Is it an all or nothing grant if we put in for, say, nominally 50,000?
Oh, would they partially fund us, you mean?
Right, correct.
Yeah, it's all or nothing. Yep, there's usually 3 awards every year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when is what's the timeline?
January.
Yeah, January would be the deadline.
For what?
For the grant. And then they would make announcements in March.
Oh, so we were saying that in March we'll know whether we're going to get the money.
Mm-hmm.
I think what Laura said is the key, sooner rather than later. I'm concerned about that we just don't keep extending into the future any possibility of development because we don't have a master plan. And what that means, it seems to me, that puts a priority in getting it done soon. Now, I suppose the issue is if we don't get the money, we'll know in January.
We'll know in March.
March. Then we have to come up with it ourselves, or and how long after that would it take to complete the plan?
About 1.5 years. So a year reasonably, but they give us 1.5 years to complete it.
So it's really approaching the point where the bridge projects, it's near the point where the bridge project is coming
to an end.
So
then we have a plan in place and.
To proceed after, which timing-wise makes a lot of sense. It was part of the reason we were reluctant at this point to go any further with the EDI project of having multiple things going on. So the timing could actually be quite good.
Your planning commission is looking at the southern section of the Route 7 South area now. Is that, you're kind of planning for that right now? In that process, is that something you could duplicate for the downtown if we don't get the funding? Or is the downtown, how do you see the downtown differently that we need, that we would have to hold it up or have to have the funding to do that?
So right now the planning commission is just meeting about the Route 7 corridor and just kind of talking internally about it. And they're thinking of applying to the municipal planning grant possibly this fall, or putting it off until next year. So they would also hire a consultant to do that project, and it would be a corridor master plan. It'd be much more straightforward because you'd just be looking at the transportation data and then having some meetings to talk to the business owners and then coming up with some recommendations for the corridor, which is different than doing this kind of visioning work for the down. It's a slightly different plan.
Okay.
Yeah. And it costs more to do this plan. So the municipal planning grant in the fall only has a maximum award of $20,000.
And that's sufficient, you think, for the southern corridor?
I think so. Yeah, we have consultants telling us they can do it for that.
Is there anything more that we could be doing to position ourselves for the grant between now and January?
Yeah, so I'm suggesting that I work on collecting this background data, working with Karen and other people, to try to to collect, I'm trying to, I have an Excel spreadsheet going of all the businesses in downtown. I'm going to combine that with Nancy's data. And I'd like to really inventory the housing. What housing do we have in downtown? What price per square foot are we getting for commercial space in downtown? Little things like that that the consultant can use when they get here to do the process. So that's what I would prefer to spend time doing now. And I prefer to do that rather than trying to promote the project, because I don't know if we'll get funded or not. And the worst thing I can do is create planning fatigue in the community by getting people excited about survey questions and things like that, and then not having something that comes of it. It's usually pretty bad form in the planning world.
I have got hit up about what's going on with the downtown master plan, and I do think in the business community there's hesitancy to invest in look at doing stuff because, well, they're going to just hold up, they don't have it planned, and I'm very fearful that that like we intentionally asked the EDI to hold off a little bit, but I got the sense when we talked about it that you're not ready to go because we don't have a downtown master plan, and I think there's cycles in any economy, and if you just hold off, you may miss a cycle, and how long can a community withstand to miss cycles because they're held up for planning purposes? And so I have a little pragmatic issue about not trying to embrace progress and the growth of the downtown for fear of, master planning. This may or may not happen by 2020 if you've got people who are willing to invest in the development and the growth of the downtown. So I don't know, I don't have the solution for it, but I know that it concerns me to hold anything off in a day and age when there's such ferocious competition for investors to invest within communities, and communities live and die on whether they embrace that or not. You can really drive investment out of a community by not embracing those who have a genuine interest in supporting it and not greeting them in an appropriate method.
So are you?
So I'm saying I'm all for it, but I'm wondering what's the bridge? What do we do if we can't get the funding, and how do we do that internally and have some planning process? We have planning people, yourself, our staff, and we've got citizens that are engaged and very interested. What is beyond a $60,000 study, what do we have that we can do as an alternate solution if we don't want to spend $60,000 on the plan and don't get a second time around, if we don't get by March, if it comes through, I think we ought to be thinking about what are we going to do if we don't get it in March, is
what I don't want people to perceive, it sounds like kind of what Victor was saying too, and it's what Karen had said to me, and that's why we got in this conversation about the retail study. I don't want people to perceive a downtown master plan as an obstacle to moving forward. Like, if Nextbridge really wants to do the EDI project, they could do it, it'd be fine. I would just recommend that since the town owns that parcel, you think about how you're going to replace that parking and how traffic would circulate through there, and that would be a robust sort of visioning session that I'd like to have a consultant for, because there are consultants that have designed things in urban areas before and would have really cool ideas to bring to the table. So it just seems like it would be sort of a next level result. But I mean, there's no reason you couldn't, I don't want it to be an obstacle either. I mean, you could do it sooner.
It seems to me it has been, and that concerns me. In other words, I think the EDI project somehow, well, at least hasn't gone forward now. I don't know why, but it does concern me that somehow it isn't a matter that we're just sort of doing ad hoc planning, saying put something here and then maybe something else and so on, but just sort of why can't we have these discussions now? Why do we have to wait until we have a consultant? And to a certain extent, I'm not opposed to having this, but it seems to me that it's becoming kind of albatross, and I want us to move forward in development and in encouraging investors to come here. And they themselves have ideas and visions. I mean, they see the town, they see opportunities and so on and so forth. And clearly we have a planning department that tries to put it in a context. I mean, this is the whole point of a plan, of putting it in a larger context. But I just feel that we just need to keep going. I mean, that there are places that are just crying out for development in our town, and I'd like to see it happen. So I guess the timeline sort of bothers me in a certain sense.
So actually, can I just maybe give us some guidance? I think we all are fully supportive of this, and we want to apply for it and see if we get it. If we don't, we're really asking you, what can we do to help you without you asking us for the full 60,000? Is there something in between where we can move it forward and not wait for the full process? You know, so you don't need to give us an answer tonight, but we're looking for what's that interim solution that allows us to create a plan. If we can fund it at some level, but we don't want to pull $60,000 out of one year's operating funds.
Right.
So,
I mean, when we did the last one, you said 2,000. Did we have a consultant then?
I really need to respond to what Victor said. We're like 3 leagues deep now. So I just want to point out that I mentioned the downtown master plan when we were hung up with the EDI site, because we were meeting about EDI. We were trying to figure out how to work with Nextbridge, and we were trying to put together a memorandum of understanding, and we really kind of ground to a halt. So I recommended a master plan as a potential solution to kind of get us a way out. And now I feel like the solution is being perceived as an obstacle, and I think we have to be really careful of that. It was a potential solution. So maybe there are other potential solutions which are not downtown master plans. And maybe it's a matter of hiring in a consultant again or something.
Yes, I think, in other words, what we're doing is planning. I mean, that's a solution, planning. And to a certain extent, just as someone plans their life, I mean, you know, you have opportunities and you go ahead and you put things in context, and I mean, I don't want to, whether DDI could have gone forward without somehow having to.
Can you go back to the screen that has all the studies? The context screen, it's like the second slide. Sorry, Victor.
But I think Brian has summarized. I mean, we support the idea of doing a master plan for the downtown, but at the same time, we want active pursuit of or encouragement of people who come here and would like to develop things, and a way of accommodating them now without saying, well, we're working on this master plan. And
I mean, I guess I don't understand how doing this plan would hinder someone from coming in and investing in the interim.
Well, you put them off and you say, well, when we have a plan, we can tell you how you fit in. I think that it has that tendency.
Seems to me one of the roles of position we're in as a town is to do what we can to make the way clear for those who are willing to invest and want to live here and want to be participants in this town in a way that obviously maintains the quality of the town. So, to reiterate what Brian's saying, I mean, we're generally endorsing of this. I like the idea. It's just a matter of we should have a contingency plan of what if it by some chance doesn't happen, so we can still help to create that way. You know, if someone comes in with an investment opportunity, I put some sort of housing unit in or mixed use, and they're ready to start, you know, making it happen. We certainly want to listen to that carefully and hopefully guide them into a good project and make this good project happen. So whatever it is that we can go along and move forward and not be in a stagnant position. And I think you have a way to do that. And hopefully it pays off. It turns out that way, but if not, to be prepared for something different.
Right, anybody who comes in and has a project just brings me an application and we put it through the DRB and we do our approval process. What happened with Nextbridge is before I started here, they went to sessions where the public was not happy with what they were giving us. And that was because we asked the developer to show us what should happen there instead of doing our work as a community to present them with a vision that they could implement. You know, and so all I did in that situation was try to show you, like in other towns, you would do the vision first. And so I want to come back to Brian's original question to me, which is like, what's our plan B? What do we do if we can't get the whole 60,000 for a full master plan? I think I have to answer that question with a question, which you won't be able to answer tonight, which is what do you want out of a downtown master plan? And so if all we want is just a specific plan that shows the site with the library expansion project and a potential EDI site or something like that, you could do that plan for a lot less money and you could just do it outside the context of an overall downtown master plan. And any of these small studies that might answer individual questions that people have, I think that your questions about you know, how do we move forward, we're much more in the retail market study area. You could do any of these small studies now. It's just a downtown master plan would be an overall plan that kind of cued you up to take on some of these other studies. And it's just, I mean, it's a knee-jerk reaction for me to be like, you know, like when I started here 2.5 years ago, I was like, why don't we have a downtown master plan in Middlebury, you know? Like, so this probably should have been done 20 years ago. And I asked Fred, why not? Well, you know, why didn't you do anything after 2000? He was like, well, we got sidetracked by the bridge project and other things happened, you know? So it's just me circling back to like kind of give you like something that I think you should have, but that doesn't mean that it's an obstacle to you moving forward. Like if someone comes in and wants to do an awesome project, we do the awesome project, you know, with what we have. Nextbridge was different. EDI was different because we were having trouble putting that MOU together and knowing what the pieces were.
Okay, one more question. Is there something that we can do as a select board or as a community to elevate our opportunity to get that grant other than just a letter?
Yeah, I mean, I think if any of us are talking to like the governor or other politically persuasive people, it's really great to kind of drop this reference. And I've talked to Jim, he mentioned that he would mention that to the people that he interacts with too. It's the Better Connections Grant.
Fred?
They'll all be here on September 11th, by the way. If you haven't heard that yet. Capital for the day is coming to Addison County on September 11th.
Good.
At least that's what I hear is the plan. The comment I just wanted to make was that I totally understand your need for a contingency because you never know if you're going to get that grant or not. But what I've seen happen is that developers appreciate a downtown master plan because they know ahead of time if what they're going to do is going to fit, they're not going to face a lot of opposition. They can go ahead with their project probably fairly smoothly, but also I'm not aware of too many neat projects that are going in downtown that don't require public investment. A lot of them are private-public partnerships. If you look at Brattleboro and Bennington, any of the bigger projects that are going in require some public investment, and those investments are going to require a master plan of some kind. Whether it's this scope of master plan, maybe it doesn't have to be, but they're going to require some kind of master plan to make that investment. You know, the federal and state dollars that they might want to invest.
Right, which is something we've been looking at, which is why I want to have a master plan, but I don't want to wait for the $60,000 one if we can't, because we've been talking about a TIF-supported parking structure, which answers some of the stuff people were talking about before. I mean, there's lots of ideas, but none of those ideas are supported currently, either through the major project investment that brings the TIF or even the master plan. But the fear is not keep pushing it off. And so if there's something that we can do to support it, that's number one. And if there's a backup plan, how do we get at least a plan that supports moving forward and gives guidance to the DRB as they're looking at projects that are maybe out of the norm.
And a TIF application to the state would require some kind of downtown, some kind of master plan be in place in order to get it approved.
Well, I think that your data collection is also part of positioning us for that grant, like that shows shovel readiness or whatever. I mean, collection of letters of support, whatever, if that's what you were talking about, like what else could help strengthen the grant application.
Taking pictures of all Karen's events.
Heather's gonna take pictures tomorrow.
I mean, I think we're demonstrating so much great community capacity right now. I think that would really strengthen the application.
Okay.
And so what you're really describing, Fred, is this reduces the risk to the stakeholders by having this plan. So that they're confident they'll move forward with whatever they present, provided it follows the rules. Okay.
Thanks for letting me hog up all this time. I don't see you guys enough. This has been really helpful to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen.
Thanks, Jen.
All right.
They said, oh, Dan, they're all leaving, Dan.
I feel like I should stay.
That makes sense. Okay. First item on the part for me here is to recommend a bid award for tree removal in the green. The tree committee worked on identifying some trees in the green that needed to be removed. This is part of this is funded through the Caring for Canopy grant that they obtained a while ago. So we put a request for bids out for removal of 7 trees, 5 in the green, 2 in Court Square. We received 3 bids back. The low bidder was Webb's Tree Service, and that is Richard Webb, who lives down in East Middlebury. It's his business. So I'm requesting the board to approve Richard Webb's bid for $2,900.
I'll move that.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed?
The second item is recommending a bid award for pump stations 3 and 9's Force Main. 3 is the one that is on halfway down Weybridge Street towards Murdoch Court. Number 9 is near the intersection of Weybridge Street and Pulteney Bridge Roads. Get an idea where those are at. But this project is to realign the force mains from those 2 pump stations so they're not pumping directly at each other. Kind of ease the way the water flows into a manhole before it goes underneath Otter Creek. Aldridge and Elliott prepared bid documents for this project. We received 1 bid, and that was from Champlain Construction. Engineer's estimate was around $23,000. So Champlain's bid was fairly close to that, and I'm asking the board to approve their bid for $21,286.49.
I'll move that.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Are there any questions on this one?
It's 1 bid, but it's close to the price that you were looking for, so okay about that.
Okay, hearing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed?
The next item is to award a bid or a contract to GS Bolton. This is a company that has done the, the crack repair and spalling repair on top of the concrete reservoir up on Chipman Hill. I consulted with our engineering firm, was Engineering Ventures, on what to use for a seal for the top of the reservoir. When they cleaned the reservoir prior to doing the repairs, when we had a very light rain shower, you go up there and see all kinds of little itty bitty spider cracks that you couldn't see otherwise until that was cleaned off. So we talked about using, getting some kind of a product to put on the top of the reservoir, and this product called Tamo Seal is a cement spray product. It is a little flexible. It seals out the water, but it does let some moisture to evaporate, or I should say, to breathe, if you will, through this sealer. Life expectancy at least 10 years. And so the engineer's estimate was at roughly $5 a square foot. Bolton offered $4.50 a square foot. Doing the math comes out to $59,935.50. And they could do that fairly shortly after if you approve it. So I'm requesting the board to approve contract to GS Bolton for $59,935.50.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any questions on this one? Hearing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed?
The last item is request to purchase a trailer for the water department. This goes back probably a little more than a year or so, where we talked about having a trailer for the water department for using to haul their excavation trench boxes to sites and stuff like that. So Bill went out and got some pricing, advertised it. G-Stone submitted the low bid at $10,285.25. Another company picked up the bid by magic of the internet and decided to submit a bid from Florida, and theirs was at $12,950. Curiosity, if anything, but anyway, we would request the board approve G-Stone's bid for $10,285.25.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Questions on this? All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Thank you, Dan. That was easy.
Yep. Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it.
Okay, next is discussion, follow-up on our Personnel Committee recommendations. Laura chaired our Personnel Committee. Would you like to review the items, Laura?
Sure. So we were looking at the staffing for our Parks and Recreation Department, and we were also looking at formalizing the employment agreement with Jim Gish, our Downtown Bridge and Rail Project Community Liaison. So regarding Parks and Rec, we endorsed Bill Kernan's recommendation not to backfill the position, and as you can see, instead create a deputy director position, which we renamed Parks and Recreation Superintendent, so that it was consistent with the level that you saw in the organizational chart for that kind of position. So, like that. So originally Bill had proposed calling that a Parks and Recreation deputy. He didn't want to call it a manager because he's the manager. So seeing that we have a wastewater superintendent, we just suggested that the language be on par like that. So that was one thing we endorsed. And we also agreed to reduce the staffing by a 0.5 full-time equivalent position. We still have a coordinator, a full-time coordinator, but and we would still have work done by interns, you know, to assist the coordinator and the Parks and Rec superintendent. So we wouldn't lose that. So that's the Parks and Recreation administrative staffing proposal.
Why don't we?
That would be one.
Why don't we address that one?
Can I ask some questions?
Yes.
First, I'm curious about the non-union union part of it. Why, when they are superintendents, are they non-union and below?
Yeah.
Can you, not that it matters this, I just didn't understand what.
So the superintendents have more hiring and firing capacity
So that's why they can't be union? Okay, thank you. And
Good question.
while I hate to question staff, hate to lose regular people. Like the recreation department, I think is really doing a superb job with programs and coordinating and events, and I just want to make sure that we're not leaving them shorthanded.
So our intention is to carefully analyze what we need going forward in indirect services, both in the recreation part and particularly in the parks part. We've really stepped up our parks game, and we're thinking that a portion of this position would be dedicated to parks and facilities maintenance.
So labor for that maintenance.
Okay.
So that our grounds are in good shape. I asked the same question, had the same concern.
I just want to
keep Parks and Rec strong.
Yes. I just, it's
And we appreciate,
it's a valuable program, and there's a lot of people using it, and it brings people here, and I just want to make sure we continue to support it is my only, I just don't want to shorthand them, that's all.
So we're not proposing any reduction in funding at this point.
Yeah, the funding level won't be reduced.
The part-time assistant would be replaced
just
with
wanna
rotating
express that.
staff. Yeah, no, it's valid. We're all cognizant of how much that's grown over the last 3-4 years.
And I personally am at a point in my life where I rely on that being such a wonderful program, so I just hope it maintains.
Yeah. Pleasure of the board on Parks and Recreation administrative staff.
I'll move that we approve the proposed restructuring of the Parks and Recreation Department administrative staff, including the establishment of the Parks and Recreation Superintendent position and the elimination of the Assistant Program Coordinator position.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any other comments or questions? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay.
Okay. So the second thing was the employment agreement with the Bridge and Rail Project Community Liaison. So we, as you see, we have a V-Trans funding grant that approved reclassifying Jim's position from part-time to a full-time Town of Middlebury employee for the duration of our project. The agreement just memorializes the terms of Jim's employment, including his wage rate and the agreed-upon benefits. That's all. So there's a letter to that effect.
So I'll make a motion to approve the proposed employment agreement with the Bridge and Rail Project Community Liaison, Jim Gish.
I'll just make one comment so that everybody recognizes Jim actually waived some of his benefits. When we moved him to full-time, he actually moved into a place where he was, his benefits exceeded what we had actually budgeted for. And he waived some of those benefits, and this also memorializes his waiver of those benefits. So that he wants to continue to do the job, and the benefits were not the key part why he's doing that job.
Thank you for that clarification.
Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Okay. Thank you, Laura. Next is municipal policies and codes.
So we've been awarded a Vermont Community Development Program for the Lindale Mobile Home Park Septic Planning Grant. And part of the requirements of that grant award is that the board adopt some policies and codes in the form prescribed by the Vermont Community Development Program. This includes equal employment opportunity policy, fair housing policy, use of excessive force policy, and policy on the use of Vermont Community Development Funds for federal lobbying, a code of ethics for administration of the Vermont Community Development Program, and Drug-Free Workplace Act of 1988.
Okay.
Pleasure of the board.
That's a little outdated.
I'll move that we approve all that.
I'll second that we approve all that.
Been seconded. Are there any questions, comments? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay. Next is designation of a town representative to the Vermont Community Leadership Summit, Make It Happen, local leadership for the future of Vermont communities. And Kathleen noted in her town manager's report at the board's last meeting, the Vermont Council on Rural Development has invited the Selectboard to designate a local leader to participate in the Vermont Community Leadership Summit, Making It Happen, local leadership for the future of Vermont communities, free of charge. Board members Farhad Khan and Lindsay Fuentes George have both expressed interest in attending this event on the town's behalf.
So the board could designate one of them for the free registration and then pay for the second one to go, the $50 registration fee.
I think that'd be wise.
I think if they both are interested, we should send them both.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean,
I was going to say that.
they're both going to hear things and maybe hear things a little different, so I think that's really advantageous. Yeah.
And
So-
I'm happy for Farhad to be the official,
Free one?
the official free guy.
Oh, well, actually, you're each, it's $25 for each of you. too.
Right, oh, okay, we're going to
Yeah,
split
it works out.
I'll make a motion to designate both Farhad and Lindsay. Do we have to designate the representative, or can we just,
Yeah, I think
We
we
do?
have to. I think that, yeah. I'm happy for it to be Farhad. He's
Okay.
been here longer.
okay, I'll make a motion to designate Farhad Khan as the representative, the town of Middlebury's representative to the Vermont Leadership Summit at Castleton University on October 1st, but that we also pay for Lindsay to attend the same conference because she would like to, and it would be good for us.
Second.
Pleasure of the board. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay. Approval of the check
Sign.
signs.
Oh, check warrants. So, I motion to approve total expenditures in the amount of $505,429.00, consisting of $395,327.65 for accounts payable and $110,101.35 for payroll for the period of August 1st, 2018 through August 14, 2018.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay. Kathleen?
Very briefly, just to note that, sad to report that the Seymour Street Hopewell Bridge sidewalk, which is grant funded, probably won't be constructed until next spring, given that we are still in Vermont Agency of Transportation and Federal Highway Administration review of the project, and we don't want to put that bid out to bid too late in the fall and be installing concrete sidewalks in November. And then, also sadly, we just heard from the State Agency of Transportation that we did not get the Exchange Street sidewalk grant this year.
You're kidding.
They had $8 million worth of funding, grant funding applications, and I think less than $2 million to hand out.
That's That's okay, we're gonna.
Sorry for all the sad things.
We'll repurpose that information.
Okay, board member concerns. Laura?
I just wanted to note the Front Porch Forum dialogue about homelessness in Middlebury as an example of a community that's really engaged civilly and kindly on a topic that's of concern to people. So this was started by a comment by Mike Buska, a resident, who observed sleeping people under the Cross Street Bridge. And that triggered a whole series of comments, which I compiled for you. And I thought it was really great how people could highlight all the services that are available and the complexity of the issue, which you can see in that document. So I encourage you to take a look at that and also see Chief Hanley's very reasoned response to it too. I think we're really fortunate that we have someone of Chief Hanley's experience that knows these trends. Like, we have always had homelessness. It is rising everywhere, not just Middlebury, because of the conditions, economic conditions that we have. And so it's just something for us to continue to watch. And I think you'll also see that Charterhouse is looking at the possibility of going year-round, certainly piloting, opening September 1st, which is a month earlier than they typically have before. And they'll be looking for support for that in the way of volunteers and funding. So I hope that whoever's watching tonight might be attracted to that. You can Google Charterhouse and you can get involved in expanding support at Charterhouse that way. So that's one thing I wanted to call out. Also, that there will be a community conversation relatedly about opioids, treatment and recovery on September 30th at the Congregational Church of Middlebury, facilitated by Emily Josselson and Andy Nikki Benson. They've done a series of community conversations, and they told us about this in a message which you might recall, just inviting us to that conversation. So those are good. You know, there are panel discussions usually and an opportunity to have good dialogue around important issues like that, public health issues. So I wanted you to note that. And then on electric switching,
Is there fun there?
Electric. Now I'm talking about electric. So I was really aware of how cold it was in this room, you know, and air conditioning does cost us a lot of electric. And I wondered if the Energy Committee might look at the energy bills again and just help the department heads see their electric bills so they can see how they are relative to last year. What I noticed when I was reviewing check warrants was a growing trend and escalation in electric, especially in the summer months due to air conditioning. We might need it, but it's just something to be aware of. Like, does it need to be this cold though in our buildings? Like, could we save a little bit by having a policy, you know, where we're managing how hot, how low we set our thermostats? So that was something I just wanted to bring to our attention as a trend. That's it.
Okay.
I just want to remind everyone to come out for the block party tomorrow night. I'll be there. I've signed up to be the official photographer, so I'm excited to get some pictures of the event. And then I'm also going to run the movie afterwards on the green, or I'm going to pretend to run the movie while the hired high school students do the work. But I'll be there, and it's Diary of a Wimpy Kid, The Long Haul, which is a lot of fun. So I think it's a good movie for parents and kids. So I hope we see a good turnout and people show up. And I want to remind people that if they spend $20 in a store, they can bring their receipt to the booth organizer people and get a raffle ticket for, I think there's like $2,000 worth of prizes giving away. So I hope people come downtown and support our businesses and just have a good time.
What's the weather forecast for tomorrow?
It's good.
It's gonna be good?
It's
great.
I don't think there's any chance of thunderstorms until later, like 11. So. I'm gonna keep it all away until you're all done.
Photographer's job.
Nick?
Just want to, I know it's been a difficult summer for our police department, our officers. We've had a abnormally high amount of injuries, and because of that, our officers have been putting in a lot of overtime. So just want to say that we as a community really do thank you for their time and dedication, and of course to the families and loved ones of these officers for their understanding of this extra time they've had to put in. So we really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Nick. Victor? Lindsay?
Since we're in the library, I thought I'd mention that on Monday, the library has an author named Patrick Phillips coming to give a talk at 2 p.m. And he wrote a book called Blood at the Root, which chronicles purging of black residents from a county in Georgia. I'm from Georgia, so I had read the book. It was of great interest to me. It happened a long time ago, obviously, in the 1910s. But he's coming to talk, and I think even if you haven't read the book, it would probably be a very interesting thing to hear about, part of our history. So yeah, I'll be there, and maybe other people want to come too.
Thank you, Lindsay. Kathleen, I had just a curiosity question. I get asked for the latest status of Blue Spruce on occasion. We haven't heard one. Can you give us an update if there any more?
Don't have any update. I'm happy to provide one at the next meeting.
Okay. And
We did talk about that briefly in infrastructure, and I think the consensus was that it was held up in insurance, so.
Of course.
I'm sure Kathleen can find a better, more concrete answer for us, but there are a lot of people asking.
yeah, so I mean, I'm sure you all get asked to, just for an update, maybe Kathleen can get us one. Are there a couple, other property owners on Court Street that are protesting something? Because there's a number of lawns that haven't been mowed in a while too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've been noticing that. Anyways, just when you take so much pride in the look of the town and then you see that, individual decisions. So I'll entertain a motion to adjourn now.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, so we're adjourning at 9:12.